Hola a todo el mundo, hoy vamos a aprender frontend. Ya había iniciado un poquito, lo único que ha hecho es cambiarle el fondo, esto cómo se llega aquí, o sea, le da a inspeccionar, estamos utilizando Firefox, creo que eso ya lo habíamos visto en la primera parte. Bueno, ahora vamos a seguir.
Get the document object model or the DOM. We're going to get into all of these things. But the next thing I want to show you is this thing called the console. Now, the console is probably the second most popular tool within developer tools, or at least in this series, we're going to be using the console quite a lot. And what the console is, it's actually called a REPL, and that stands for read, evaluate, print, and loop. Now, you don't really need to know that. What I want you to remember about this console is two things. Number one, it allows you to write JavaScript. And number two, it allows you to actually modify the document object model or the DOM. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the series, but these are the two main things that the console allows us to do. And to show you, I'm going to just give you a short example of how we can use the console to make some of the changes that we are also making here in the inspector. So if you remember, we kind of changed the image within the inspector. We can also do that within the console. So let's grab a different dog picture here just for fun. Grab this one here, I like this, and copy the image location. And all that's doing is just copying the actual file that we're looking at. From here, we can go back to our page. And what we want to do is actually select the image tag on this page. So all we have to do is say document.querySelector and then type in img. And you can see that when I do this, this little element here that we were editing earlier is highlighted. And down here, it's actually printing out what we're going to get when we press enter. So when we press enter, we get this image, but we actually have to save that in a variable real quick. So let's say our image, and again, don't worry about what's going on here. We'll talk about all of this later. But we'll say document.querySelector img. We'll save that. So now our image is actually representing this element on the page. And then we can say our image.setAttribute. And what I want to set is the source. And I want to set that equal to the link that we just copied from that dog photo. And when I press enter, it's actually going to change this on the page. And I can also resize this just like we did earlier. So our image.setAttribute, or actually no, it's not set attribute, it's style.width equals, let's say 100. I'm sorry, it's actually not. It is an attribute. So let's set the attribute. Sorry, I'm doing this in real time here. So let's go with width, and we'll go for 100 here. And you can see that it goes down, resizes accordingly. So this is just a short example of how we can use the console to actually edit the document object model, or we can just think of it as the web page for now. Not only that, but we can also write pure vanilla JavaScript within this REPL or this console. And to show you that, I've
Bueno,
actually already showed you that because I saved our element in a variable, a JavaScript variable, but we could also write a function. So we could write a function that says change image or something like that. And it takes a URL and then it's going to actually change the image. So let's go ahead and make that function. And what that's going to do is going to say document.querySelector img set attribute, and we're going to say source, and then we're going to pass in the URL. Once again, don't worry about what I'm doing here. This is just examples. And then I'm going to say enter down, and that's our function. So now I can execute this function, and I can paste in that URL and click enter, and I guess it's already there, so it's not going to change. But if we went over to a different dog picture, and run this. But if we went over and click enter, and I guess it's already there, so it's not going to change. But if we URL and click enter and this function, and I can paste in that
¿Creen que es fácil? Pues no es fácil. Así sea copiando, no se puede equivocar. Entonces, change image. Genial.
URL and click enter, and I guess it's already there, so it's not going to change. But if we went over to a different dog picture and run this function, you'll see that it changes the image in the browser. So we can write JavaScript, we can modify the web page, all that stuff within the console. And we're actually going to be learning a lot of the initial concepts of JavaScript here in the console because it is so easy to set up and get going. All you have to do is, as we showed, you just right click, inspect element, click on the console, and boom, you're ready to write JavaScript. So it's a great place to start so that we don't have to set up all this elaborate stuff just to write basic JavaScript. There are a couple of other features within developer tools that I want to show you here, but they're less important than the first two that we looked at, so the inspector and the console. Now, just to remind you, right click, inspect element, and from here I want to go up to the network tab. So this network tab is something that you will be using a lot later on. And if we refresh the page, you're going to see that there's some activity here. And what's happening here in this network tab is you're actually seeing all of the resources that are being transferred to and from over the network to this web page. So Google's backend servers are actually sending resources to the front end, and you're actually seeing all these resources displayed in the browser. So an example of that would be this Google image right here. And if we click on the images part, you can see that the December holidays in the response is actually the image that we're looking at here. And if you wanted to see other things about this, such as the timings, how long it took to load, you can look at the HTTP headers, all that kind of stuff. This will be very useful for us as we get into more of the back-end development where we're talking about API requests and HTTP and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So we'll come back to this. We'll spend some time here a lot later in the series, but I wanted to expose you to it initially so you can see that this is something that we will be using. Now another thing we will be using, if you click this little arrow over here, is storage.
Almacenamiento. Almacenamiento.
And storage is useful for a couple of things. Storage is going to be useful for tracking user behavior on a site. So, not to play the blame game here, but when we talk about Facebook and all of the cookies that Facebook puts on your web browser, on your mobile phone, all that kind of stuff, this is where this is being stored. So you can see Google is storing these cookies about us as the user. And although these probably won't mean a whole lot to us as people using the site, these have specific IDs and all sorts of identifiers that allow Google to know things about the user. This is also great for authentication. This is how we're going to actually log in and register people to our app. And when we build our backend dashboard for editing our blog for our personal website, we're going to need authentication because we don't want just anyone coming and editing our blog. So this storage tab is what we're going to use to actually do that. And while it's a very advanced topic that comes later down the road, I also wanted to show it to you. Everything else that you see here, whether it be the inspector console, debugger, network, style editor, all this kind of stuff, everything else is not quite important enough for us to cover here, so I'm just going to leave it there for now. You probably won't even use anything outside of what I talked about for at least several months or even years, or maybe even ever as a web developer. All right, so I think I've covered mostly what these developer tools are about. Just to review, right-click anywhere on a web page, inspect element, and you'll get to these developer tools. Now, the last thing I want to do in this video is actually show you what coding is all about and have you write your first JavaScript program. Well, you probably will not understand the concepts behind the code we're about to write. I want to get you in the habit of actually writing code and get you feeling comfortable in this console that we talked about earlier. So open up a web browser, hopefully the Firefox browser you just downloaded. Put this video on the side, open up the console. So right click, inspect, go to the console. You can even type clear with two little parentheses to clear the console. And we are ready to get started. Now the goal.
Vamos a la consola, le damos clear y seguimos.
Goal of this program is going to be every time we click on Google's web page, so when I click it, I'm actually clicking right now, I want the background of the page to actually change color, and I want that color to be a random color.
Entonces, cada vez que le dé clic, va a cambiar de color.
We can do this with JavaScript code, and I'm going to walk you through line by line how we're doing it and kind of explain what each line does just to give you a feeler. Again, don't worry about how everything's working. We're going to go into the details of the JavaScript language in future videos. The first thing we have to do is save the body HTML tag in a variable. So when I say body HTML tag, every web page that you're going to go to has this thing called the body. And this represents kind of the container for the entire web page, aside from, of course, the topmost container, which is called HTML. So we want to select this body, and this is what we want to actually change the background for. So we can actually do this manually. And we can come down here, and right now you see on the body the background is hashtag FFF, which is just the hex code for the color white. Now we can type in green, and you can see
El cuerpo. el background. Vamos a darle green. Y ya. Y ahora es verde.
See that the background actually changes in our web browser. Now what I want to do is do this in vanilla JavaScript and do it every time we click the screen. So in order to do that, the first thing that we have to accomplish is saving that body tag. So let's type clear to get a clean space, and then let's type in a variable. So here's our JavaScript variable. We want to set that equal to document.querySelector, and then we want to get the body tag. So when we press enter, that's going to be the HTML body. You can actually print that out and see that we have successfully retrieved that and stored it in that variable. From here, we actually need to create a function. Now this function, we're going to save in a variable, and I know this is getting a little bit confusing at this point, but bear with me and type along as I'm doing this. So we're going to go through this function, and we're going to assign something called an array. So this array is going to contain various colors of our choice. So you can put as many as you want in here separated by commas. I'm just going to put in a couple random colors here that I've saved. So 2942, these are just hex codes. So you can actually go hex codes, something like that. You can go to Google and you can see all the different hex codes here. There's various tools that you can use.
Hagamos los hex codes. Si era así. Vamos a ver si es así. Entonces, function, random color. Colors. Colors. Vamos a hacer un arreglo. C21 E56 FF033C FFFFE. ¿Cuántas F son? 5 F. Cero, cero, 5550 blue, magenta.
For this. But anyways, we're going to save these as a comma separated array. And let's go add a few more. And then you can also, a valid CSS value would be something like red, blue, or green. So we can also type in red, blue, green, yellow, orange, and maybe even purple. All right, so we have saved this colors array. Now the next thing that we have to do is get a random index from this array. And when I say index, each of these values are at a certain index within this array, and we'll talk more about this later again. But this one would be the 0th index, this would be the first index, the second, third, so on and so forth. To get this random index, we have to actually use a built-in JavaScript library called the math library. And we need a random index between 0 and, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 items within this array, so we want a index between 0 and 7 because arrays are 0 index. They don't start at 1. So we'll get a random index here. That'll be equal to math.floor. And we're going to pass in math.random. Please don't worry about what's going on here. This is just an example. And this will give us our random index. And I actually pressed enter a little bit too early, so we actually have to rewrite this function. Okay, I've kind of returned to where I was before I pressed enter and screwed this all up. But basically, we're getting a random number between 0 and 7. And the way that we do that is actually get the length of the array by typing colors.length. So let's not make that mistake again. Let's enter down a couple times. And now we have to actually grab the random color and save that in a variable. So we'll grab the random color. That'll be equal to colors, and then we'll insert our random index that we have generated. Then we are going to actually style the body. So all we have to do is grab this variable that we saved up here called HTML body. And then we want to go to the style and then background color, not clip, background color. And then we want to set that equal to our random color here. So that's going to actually do what we showed earlier and change the background color. And then the last thing I want to do is just print to the console a confirmation that this worked. So we'll do something like this. We'll say the user clicked and set the color to, and then we'll concatenate this string in here and say random color. Okay, our function is done. Hopefully it works here. And the way that we see if it works is by running it or executing it. So we'll do random click function, and it looks like the user has clicked.
Ok, entonces hay que hundir Shift Enter para que no falle, para que no se vaya a Enter. Entonces, con random index equals to math.floor de math.random times colors.length. Saco el índice. Random color equals colors and random index y html body style style, background,
and change the color. Works, it's done. Hopefully it works here. And the way that our function is done,
background color, igual a random color. Y decimos console.log the user, el usuario ha dado clic y el color es un espacio porque después falla, ¿cierto? Y llamamos a random color y cambia. Genial.
hopefully it works here. And the way that we see if it works is by running it or executing it. So we'll do random click function, and it looks like the user has clicked and changed the color. Now to finish this program off, the last thing we have to do is set an event listener on the HTML body element. Now this is a little bit advanced, but it's kind of a cool feature of JavaScript and all that kind of stuff. So all we have to do is go to HTML body and say on click. So it's saying when the user clicks, I want to execute this random click function. All right, so once I press enter, now we have wired it up so that every time we click, it's going to change the color. So I'm going to click a couple times. Since it's random, we might get a couple duplicates here, but then we can even close this and keep clicking and get all sorts of different results here. So it's actually a pretty cool program that we just wrote.
Bueno, vamos a terminarlo. Entonces, y miramos la consola con espacio, porque los programadores buenos, mentiras, él es muy buen programador.
And you can see, even you who have never written a line of code before were able to kind of follow along and type what I was typing and write your first little program. In other words, you just did something that almost everyone in the world does not know how to do and will never know how to do. Your brain is probably in utter confusion right now, but don't worry. In the next couple videos, we're going to actually be deep diving into this JavaScript programming language, and we're going to be learning how I wrote this program, what are all these different symbols that we're typing into the console, and all that kind of good stuff. So don't worry if you're completely confused. This video was mainly to give you an introduction to the developer tools that you can have within any browser. We're using Firefox, but it just gives you that introduction and also just some exposure and some comfort levels actually writing real JavaScript code. And that's it for this first video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and also that little bell so you're notified when new videos are posted to this series. And thanks for watching.
Bueno.
Today
¿Cuánto le falta a esto? 13 minutos.
we're going to be talking about what is JavaScript and why do we use it. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say, because we know that's going to be simple. JavaScript, often abbreviated as JS, is a programming language that conforms, and I think I'm going to stop right there because this is not a useful definition, especially for most people watching this. What you can remember JavaScript as is just a programming language. And more specifically, it's a programming language that is made for the web. You have other languages like C++, Python, PHP, Ruby, C#, all of these different languages, and they all kind of have their unique characteristics. And JavaScript's unique characteristic is that unlike these other languages that cannot run in a web browser, JavaScript can. This has been the case for quite some time, but recently, as you can see, the 1.0 version of WebAssembly has been released in 4 different browsers, which does let you write all of these other programming languages to run within the browser. But for now, just think of JavaScript as the programming language of the web, because it's the easiest to write in the browser, and even with WebAssembly, there's a lot of complicated steps to get all of that set up. So you say JavaScript is the programming language of the web, but is that all it can do? Well, the answer is no, but if you asked that question 20 years ago, you might have been laughed at. Since that time, though, JavaScript has gained a lot of traction in development communities and was the most used language in the Stack Overflow Developer Survey of 2020. And to name a few things that you can do with JavaScript, let's pull this up here. You can create web applications. So there's lots of front-end frameworks like Angular here. You've also got React. I think this is the most popular one at the moment. You can do back-end pieces of your web application or back-end servers with things like Nest.js. You can also create desktop applications. If I pull up my Visual Studio Code, which is a code editor, this is actually a desktop application that was built using this tool called, or framework called, Electron. So you can build desktop applications for various operating systems. You can also create mobile apps with React Native and NativeScript. And then finally, you can do AI and machine learning data science projects with TensorFlow.js and a couple other libraries. So to say that JavaScript is not a powerful language is a bit of a miss here, because JavaScript has many different applications. The next question that you might ask is, can JavaScript get you a job? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. But JavaScript alone is not going to do it. You have to actually learn frameworks such as the ones that I've gone through here: Angular, React, Nest.js, Electron, React Native. All of these frameworks that are built around JavaScript are what you get hired for. And speaking of frameworks, what is a JavaScript framework, or any framework for that matter? Well, the way that I think about it is the framework is something on top of a programming language. So it's an abstraction on top of JavaScript that enables a developer to do something more efficiently in less time. Facebook is created largely with a framework, a front-end framework called React. And this is a very popular framework. We just went over it. And Facebook could definitely have been built without a framework. It could be built in just JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But the reason that it wasn't is because the developers there decided, hey, this is getting really repetitive, and we have certain things that we do over and over and over again that we want to kind of automate. And therefore, React was born. React is something that the developers at Facebook kind of created in order to make their jobs easier and more efficient. We can use a little bit of a construction analogy to think about frameworks. If you're trying to build some commercial real estate building, are you going to use a shovel and a ladder to create this whole entire building and, drive all the materials back and forth in pickup trucks? The answer is no. You're going to get huge trucks, you're going to get bulldozers, you're going to get cranes, you're going to get all sorts of big materials in order to build this huge building. And it's the same thing with building web apps, or honestly anything that you would build with code. If you're trying to do it with just a language like JavaScript, and you're not using some of the popular frameworks that have been built on top of that, you're basically showing up to a construction site with a shovel and a pickup truck. So you don't want to do that. In order to be employable, you need to understand how to use these different frameworks like Angular or React, or even a framework like Electron, which enables you to write desktop applications like Visual Studio Code. All right, I think that's enough on frameworks for now. Could do a whole video on it. Let's go to the next question, which is JavaScript the same as Java, or at least similar? And the answer to that is no. If you search enough on the internet, you'll probably stumble upon the analogy of a car versus a carpet. They both have car within the word, but they're nothing alike. And that's kind of the story with JavaScript and Java. Now, Java was actually the inspiration for JavaScript way back in the day, and JavaScript was meant to be a companion to Java. So they do have some similarity, but when you're writing each of the languages, they could not be more different. The next question is JavaScript better than Python, or honestly, insert any language there? The answer to that is always going to be it depends. And the reason that I say that is because all these different languages that you're choosing between have different unique use cases. And while they can all kind of do the same thing, they all are programming languages, some of them are better for certain types of industries than others. So if you're asking me to build an app like Facebook, I'm probably going to go with JavaScript and use some JavaScript frameworks because that's what those are made for. They're made for creating apps like Facebook. But if you wanted me to do some machine learning and build out the computer that sits in a Tesla, I'm probably not going to use JavaScript. I'm probably going to use Python because Python has a much more mature ecosystem around this topic of machine learning, AI, data science, all that kind of stuff. So when you're asking whether you should go with JavaScript or another language, it really depends on what kind of industry you're getting in, what you're trying to build, all that kind of stuff. If you're trying to build a web app like Facebook, JavaScript is great. If you're trying to do some machine learning, Python is great. If you're trying to create an extremely efficient, we'll say, banking application or something like that, a language like C++, which is much faster in execution than a JavaScript, would be a good choice. There's no right answer here, but there are different ecosystems around each of these languages, and you'll kind of notice as you study them that certain types of developers kind of gravitate towards different languages. Another question that you might have is HTML and CSS required to work with JavaScript? And the answer to that is yes and no. It kind of depends on where you're actually running that JavaScript. Now let's start with the front end because this is a little bit easier to explain, and then we'll move on to the back end. If you don't know the difference between those, I actually made a video on the difference between front end and back end development. Anyways, let's go over to my browser here. On the left side of my screen, I have an HTML file that is actually open in Notepad here on the right. Not doing any fancy editors here, just want to get a few points across. So let's create a basic HTML document here. I know I haven't actually gone through how this all works yet, but we will get there, I promise, at some point here.
Yo creo que ya puedo terminar. De pronto lo vuelvo a empezar ahorita más tarde. Esto es todo por ahora de del streaming del streaming de frontend. Nos estaremos viendo más tarde o mañana. Eso es todo por hoy. Tengan un día genial. Déjenme un like, compartan, coméntenme si algo no les gustó, si algo les gustó. Revisen todo lo que promuevo debajo en la descripción, como audífonos para dormir, o unos videos que sirven para relajarse, o la escuela de skate de mi hermano. Bueno, tengan un día genial. Hasta luego.